Good evening, everybody. It's Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. We ran for president and vice president on the Green Party line in 2020, and we're continuing to raise issues. Like tonight, we're going to be talking about why trans rights are human rights. But I want to talk a little bit about what's on my mind. And this is an unusual source. I'm in the American Legion. I'm a veteran. So my magazine today had a thing about whatever happened to civics. And it was a good article. I usually flip through this thing and don't read anything, but this really caught my attention. First, let me give you some statistics. Most college graduates think Thomas Jefferson wrote the Constitution. No, that was the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was in France when the Constitution was written there in Philadelphia. More than a third of college graduates cannot name a single right that we have in the First Amendment. A third of college graduates. 1 in 10 college graduates think that TV's Judge Judy is on the U.S. Supreme Court. And then another survey found that 19% of millennials believe that a military coup is not incompatible with democracy. And 30% of millennials believe it is essential in a democracy, or believe that electing our representatives is not essential. So, the question is, in the article, whatever happened to civics? And I've wondered that. I'm a child of Sputnik. And, when the Russians threw up that Sputnik satellite before the US could, our leadership freaked out. I mean, they changed the math. Instead of the old textbooks, I had a little yellow paperback with, the new math, they called it. And they were introducing algebraic formulas to us in 4th and 3rd grade. Supposedly that was supposed to make us better mathematicians. I don't think it did, but that STEM emphasis, science, technology, engineering, math, has kind of pushed aside civics. This is the author's theory, and I think it's pretty good. Secondly, we got these culture wars. When it came to writing civics after the civil rights movement, the old conservatives wanted a white supremacist narrative, and the new narrative was multicultural. And because they haven't been able to agree on that, textbooks, teachers are afraid to even talk about civics because they don't want to get caught in a culture war. And then finally, in the last 20 years, we've had No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, the Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden administrations pushing this high stakes testing on a school system. All of that has crowded out history and civics. So you get people that don't know any of their rights under the First Amendment and think Jefferson wrote the Constitution and think a coup could happen in a democracy. I mean, so I think, that kind of explains how we got to where we are. We put too much emphasis on, the hard science. This culture war's got us paralyzed. And then we got this high stakes testing where they test for the things that are easily quantifiable, which is the math and those English tests. They can't agree on what the right answers are in civics and history. So I don't know where that leaves us. I mean, I think it's an issue we got to bring to our schools. I think it's also an issue we got to bring, the Green Party should become civics educators in our communities, because people don't even know. I mean, I go out and canvass in a low-income neighborhood. A lot of people will ask, well, what does the mayor do? Or what does the city councilor do? Because the only thing they know about government are cops, courts, and jail. That to them is the government. They don't even know, how laws are made that affect them. So I just thought that kind of struck me. Those statistics, you probably heard them before, but why we don't have civics in our schools. And it's, the emphasis on the hard sciences, the culture war, and now this high stakes testing. And they, so we got people that don't even know how the government they live under works. So that's what's on my mind today, Angela. How about you?
As listening to you and also like trying to write down my notes at the same time, because trying to organize my thoughts. Y'all get in the work clothes edition. Hello everybody. Hey Green family, Gada and Miss Leo and Violet and Diana and all my loves to Tame. Thank y'all for being here last week. That was a massively, massively heavy discussion. Hi baby. Hey Tiffany. Massively heavy discussion. A very difficult one. I don't mind y'all knowing I was utterly, completely, hey Dan, terrified of coming into that discussion. And kind of making sure that I was, that everybody was taken care of. So the feedback that I've gotten and that we've gotten has been really good. So I thank y'all, and also our team, for handling the trolls, because we're not having it. And just like last week, this week is the same. There will be no turfing around here. We're not here for that. So, our family is on their game tonight. One of the things that I also want to bring to y'all is there was a massacre in Atlanta last week. And Howie and I and our team want to lift up again the folks who died, who were murdered in Atlanta, and also let folks know that we stand, as I tweeted it, but I'm Twitter avoidant, but making sure that people know where we stand on Asian hate crimes against Asian people, and particularly against Asian immigrants. And this also opens up, because these were spies, that there has been speculation around sex work. And so at some point, we are going to go there with this. There's going to be a segment, a night that we are going to talk about sex work and where we stand on sex work, and the fact that sex work is work, and that sex workers deserve the same rights and protections as any other worker. And so that is coming. Is something that I have intimate knowledge of. So we want to lift up those families. We want to lift up the folks who were taken from us too soon, rise in love, and let the Asian communities, diverse Asian communities across the country understand we stand with you. There's no question. And, solidarity. And, we've got folks on our team who were very much affected by what happened last week. And so one of the things that we're going to be including in the chat, one of my favorite podcasts, Interho Uprising, Sam of Interho Uprising did a dope segment digging into this attack and these murders, and a complete history of anti-Asian violence, particularly violence against Asian women in this country and Asian women who are involved in the sex industry. And this conflation, all of these stereotypes of Asian women that, evidently this shooter, I'm not mentioning him. I don't want to know his name. My understanding of him is, these urges I had, prompted me to do this garbage. So if we're at the intersection of toxic masculinity, racism, misogyny, anti-immigrant sentiment, and it culminated in murder. We have a problem. We've had a problem. We've had this problem for 400 plus years, and we're over it. So, Sam did a beautiful, beautiful tribute to those that were lost, and also an amazing history into, digging into all of the root causes, which, we don't like to talk about root causes in this country, and we're never going to heal if we don't. So we need to quit lying to ourselves about who we really are and what we really do. So that is happening. And also, and I want y'all, it's in the chat, Y'all will love them. And her whole uprising is life. Also, I included because I am cisgender. I'm queer, but I am cisgender. And so when it comes to, and I've got people who are very important to me who are trans and non-binary. And I can't speak for those communities. I get my learning directly from people who are trans. And so one way that I've done that, been able to access, information, and am immensely grateful, is a Black trans podcast called Marsha's Plate. And if y'all are not following Diamond, Z, and Mia, y'all need to. You are missing out on life. As far as breaking it down, major issues that people need to understand from a trans perspective. Absolutely necessary, and how we as cisgender people can be accomplices for our trans family in ways that are truly helpful. So y'all want to, if y'all are not following Marsha's Plate, y'all want to. And so with no more ado, I am going to introduce our first guest. And this is Emma Lugo. Emma Lugo is a community activist and a board member at KBOO Community Radio. As a trans queer woman, she became involved in organizing within the transgender community in 2014, helping to organize the first ever transgender rights march in Portland, Oregon. Get it? She has also served as a panelist and organizer on a range of queer community projects, including organizing a panel of transgender members of the U.S. military, and as principal organizer of the Transgender Day of Remembrance Interfaith Vigil. On air, Emma co-hosts the radio program Trans Positive. So if y'all not, you're in that area and this is a radio program that you can get, tune in, check her out, which uplifts the voices of the transgender and non-binary community. As an abolitionist and prison activist, Emma also co-hosts the radio program Prison Pipeline, which interviews and brings to public awareness aspects of the prison industrial complex from a humanitarian perspective, and a view towards representing the authentic voices of those inside and the issues which form the narratives of their life experiences. Emma, it is our pleasure to welcome you, our Green here with our Green family. Welcome you to our little humble live stream tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's great to meet you, Angela. I had to submit your paperwork for the state of Oregon to get you on the ballot, and I was so proud that you were our candidate, and you too, Howie.
That means a whole lot to me. Yeah, I knew who you were by your name. I was like, oh, I know exactly who this is. Tell the folks about you.
Well, I'm here tonight. I'm not here representing like all trans voices, and I mean I do want to acknowledge that the voices of trans women of color isn't necessarily here tonight. It needs to be, because trans women of color are the people who really suffer the most under the burden, the intersectional burdens of capitalism, of racism, of misogyny, and of transphobia. And most recently we just had another trans woman of color murdered just this last week in the United States. And almost all of the trans people who are murdered in this country are trans women of color. And so I want to acknowledge that, as a white person, I'm not going to represent that voice at all. And that voice needs to be here at the table. But in the meantime, I will try to represent at least some of the perspective of trans folks. We're members of the Green Party. I have been with the Green Party for 25 years, ever since Ralph Nader ran in 1996. And I'm a proud member of the Green Party. I've run for U.S. Senate 3 times, and I serve on my state coordinating committee and serve as secretary. The voices of trans women are really important. They're an important part of the queer narrative. And I think that the Green Party really supports and uplifts the voices of trans folks. For the most part, I've always felt really welcome in the Green Party, and I feel like most people in the Green Party are really clued in on our issues. But there's a lot of misperceptions about what trans women are. First of all, I just want to say trans women are women. I mean, we're women. Now, not all trans women are, but those of us who like want to be identified within the binary, we're women. And we have been fighting for our legal rights ever since the Compton cafeteria riots. But we've always been here. I mean, there's always been trans women. We've always been part of this country. We've always been part of the cultural history of the world. I mean, going all the way back to the beginning of human history. So we're here and we're proud, and this is really our time. We've been rising up, we've been gaining rights, we've been becoming visible, and I'm so proud that we have a trans woman on our National Steering Committee. I'm really looking forward to hearing from her in a minute. And I just wanted to say thank you for having us on the show tonight.
I can't thank y'all enough for making the time to be here with us. And I thank you for lifting up, because, you know, Mars's Plate is a Black trans podcast, but absolutely, when we're talking about members of the most marginalized group in this country, we are talking about Black and brown trans people, particularly Black and brown trans women. Murders of Black and brown trans women in the United States are epidemic. And it goes.
Last year it was 41. 41 trans women of color were murdered in the United States.
And there were a couple of names, you know, I'm thinking of Remy Fells,
Diamond
Rhea
Phillip.
Mills, that we lifted up here. And it goes largely unreported. And I think we'll talk about this, you know, going in, because these are trans people, and because violence against trans women, particularly trans women of color, is underreported. And, you know, there's a bunch of reasons for that, but we have a lot of problems, you know, culturally with the way that we handle our trans family. And so, you know, I'm super grateful to have your voices and your presence here tonight. And our next guest is no stranger to this live stream. They've been here. So, and I'm gonna call you in on these mojitos too, Margaret Elizabeth. But Margaret Elizabeth has been involved in environmental activism for the last 25 years, with a specific focus upon leave no trace camping and festivals and non-monetary barter-based economies with community policing. They were a co-creator of a still ongoing recurring event called Playa del Fuego, Beach of Fire, based off of the Burning Man ethos in 1998. Margaret has participated in the Green Party ever since Ralph Nader's campaigns, and they currently serve as co-chairs for both the Green Party's National Lavender Caucus and as national co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. So Margaret, good to have you here, Angel.
Hi, Angela. Hi, Howie. Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me on the webcast again tonight. I appreciated a chance to get to talk to you all directly, which I always really enjoy, and a chance to address the Greens in a broad perspective as well. So
tell the folks about you.
Okay, look, there's a bunch of things I'd like to say, and we don't have a bunch of time tonight. So to an extent, I want to kind of just say a few things, right? So first off, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the city of Seattle, which is on stolen Salish land, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish, Squamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot tribes. This is still an ongoing issue, of course, in many places in our country, but I just want to make sure that I acknowledge this. And this acknowledgement does not replace a formal relationship with the former and current owners of the lands that we exist on right now. But what I want to talk about tonight in a broad sense isn't so much about me, even though I normally enjoy that kind of thing. What I'd like to talk about is something different. I'd like to kind of if I may, take us into a bit of an international perspective and draw a picture, if I can, between the connection between why LGBTQIA+ rights and women's rights are connected together in an inextricable way, and which cannot be untangled. And I hope you'll give me just a moment here to kind of say my thing, and I'll be quick about it if I can be. So, colleagues, friends, according to the Human Rights Watch, the status of the LGBT community is like a good litmus test for the status of human rights in society more broadly, precisely because this community is a vulnerable minority, similar to the proverbial canary in the coal mine. Where the rights of LGBTQIA+ people are undermined, you can be sure that the rights of other minorities and critical members of civil society will also soon be in jeopardy. And I want to bring us to a real world example of what I'm talking about. So in 2015, a right-wing populist party arose in Poland called the Law and Justice Party. The Law and Justice Party took power in 2015, and in 2019, as a result of this, 80 towns, cities, and municipalities in Poland declared themselves to be LGBT-free zones after the Law and Justice Party made opposition of LGBTQIA+ rights a central plank in their platform. A wave of homophobia and transphobia started sweeping across the nation, leading to a confrontation during a pride parade in August 2020 in the Polish city of Białystok, where 1,000 marchers were confronted by more than 4,000 ultra-nationalists, Catholic hardliners, and right-wing hooligans. Polish police reported more than 104 arrests of the counter-protesters for offenses ranging from throwing cobblestones and bottles full of urine to throwing improvised explosive devices at the marchers. In October of 2020, the Constitutional Court of Poland overturned a law that allowed for abortions in cases of severe and irreversible fetal abnormalities for being unconstitutional. According to the Ordo Juris International Law Center in Poland, in 2019, 98% of all abortions were carried out on those grounds, meaning that this ruling has effectively banned the vast majority of all abortions in Poland. According to the same institute, about 1,000 abortions are performed in Poland a year, and 200,000 women travel abroad for the same procedure. The new law, which is pending right now in their plenary session, will classify abortion as murder and will prosecute all of these people who leave the country to go abroad for this procedure as murderers as well. Recently, and as of 1 week ago, the mayor of Warsaw made a public declaration in opposition to this ruling and called for women to reject this decision by marching in the streets, which they are currently doing. You may have seen these protests night after night on the news. The women and the other protesters who are there as allies with them are wearing green headscarves to show their solidarity with the women of Argentina who have recently won this right as well. And so what I see when I look at this stuff is a really clear connection between controlling a certain kind of woman's body, specifically trans women's bodies. And once trans women's bodies can be controlled, the next step is controlling other women's bodies too. This is clearly and what is going on in these countries where they enact these laws, and this is clearly the end game in all of these kind of efforts. When we look here in the United States, to bring it kind of local again, you see right now that currently there are 15 states which have laws pending in some varying forms going through their state legislatures targeting trans youth, specifically for participation in sports and athletics in our society. And friends, this is completely anathema to everything we stand for in the Green Party. If you're not aware of our platform, I strongly encourage you to check it out. But our platform has been consistent about this for 11 years now. Self-identification, gender identity, and trans people are completely 100% accepted and welcome, encouraged in our party. So why would we be dealing with these issues if that's the case? Regressive forces come in a variety of factors, and a variety of people will be swayed by them, because sometimes when you fear the other, all it takes is one person, a demagogue, to sort of harness that fear, harness that reticence to embrace the other, to change your perspectives. And once that gets going, it's very difficult to disengage it. We see it right now happening all across our country. We see it happening, broadly speaking, in the United Kingdom, where there is a vast assault against trans people taking place there right now. And I've taken up a bunch of time, so I think I should probably stop here about what I need to say. So thank you.
First off, this is why y'all are here. So I don't want either one of you to be skittish about, speaking on what you need to speak on, because that's why you're here. So
I don't
don't
think
be
either of
ginger
us have
about
any
it.
problem with I don't think we have any problem with that, Angela.
Hank Wallace, because I'm in the mood for it tonight. You're in the wrong place, babe. You're in the wrong place. There you go. Out that way. So yeah, like I said, I need y'all to speak on what you need to speak on. When we're talking about trans rights for the most basic, at its most basic level, what are we talking about, Emma?
Well, okay, so I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, part of the reason that we're here right now is because this is Women's History Month, and trans women are women. So, but there's this misconception. There's a lot of misconceptions. One is that trans women really aren't women. There's this idea that trans women are, they're confused, that this is a lifestyle choice. I hear that all the time. This is a lifestyle choice, that we're part of some sort of a movement, like we're like a cult. We're part of this cult of like, or that we have mental illness, or that we're just not really what we say we are. And so you have to understand, like for trans women especially, and this is why I brought up the issue about trans women of color at the beginning. Transitioning can be really dangerous. There's nothing more dangerous in our culture than transgressing patriarchy. Well, no, I shouldn't use that as an extreme, but as a qualifier, I'm just going to say that one of the most dangerous things that you can do in this culture is to cross the boundary of patriarchy. And trans women are on the front lines of doing that, because we are people who are raised assigned male at birth, but we always knew for most of us, we've known from the time we were very young that we were women, but we were assigned male. And so we've had to transgress all of the patriarchal institutional training that like tries to tell us that we're men, and we're not. We're women. And until recently, there was no cultural narrative to support us. The Green Party has been a really great space for the most part. It's been a really safe space for trans folks. It's been a haven for me and for a lot of other trans folks, because we need safe spaces where we can, feel comfortable with who we are, and, kind of explore what our freedoms are within the community. Right now, the trans rights are under attack in this country, just as Margaret Elizabeth was saying. And where they're going after right now is they're going after trans kids, because trans adults, we've started to gain some rights. We've started to gain the rights, like just to use the bathroom. I mean, if you could imagine what it's like for most of the history of the 20th century, like trans women, we couldn't use the bathroom. And it's like, it's not that convenient to like not be able to pee. That's a real problem. But now we can use the bathroom in a lot of states. And that's like such a small thing. But like here in Oregon, for instance, 2 years ago here in Oregon, there was a transgender woman out in Lincoln City, Oregon, and she tried to use the bathroom, and a man beat her to, within an inch of her life, fractured her face in like 12 or 14 different places. She was on, she had to have reconstructive surgery just for using the bathroom. And this is the kind of danger that trans women face every day, just going out in public. I mean, especially trans women who don't pass. Now, there's this term, it's called passing. And so for some trans women, they have something called passing privilege. And that means that we can walk out on the streets and nobody's going to question us. We're not going to get questioned about who or what we are, because we have passing privilege. And that's another kind of privilege, along with like other kinds of privilege that like really needs to be analyzed and looked at. Anyways, I could go more into it, but I'd like to make sure that Margaret Elizabeth has a chance to step in. So Margaret, do you have more to say?
Well, I mean, I do. As a matter of fact, I have lots of words, and I want to thank you, Emma, for definitely for being here tonight and offering your perspective. I think it's really important to have a lot of voices participating in the conversation because all of us have very unique experiences, and I think that because of those unique experiences, it allows us to see the same problem from a variety of angles. And so we can really get a good consensus based decision on how to address it and move forward. And I kind of want to come back to a thing that you had mentioned, which was that the Green Party is a good place for queer people to be, specifically trans people. It is. That's why I joined. Like, other than just being a normal voter, which I had been, I decided to join the National Party in part because of Dr. Stein's campaign, but more specifically because of the platform that the Green Party had. Not just its ecological profile and all the rest, which it's well known for, but specifically for its social justice platform. And I found it to be the most comprehensive and most consistent platform of any of the parties, and thus I was already inclined to be here, so it was easy. Um, but even though it is a good place generally for queer people in the Green Party, pardon me, that doesn't mean that we're without our issues. In fact, we have a pretty significant issue going on in the Green Party right now with people who have transmissic behaviors, a turf behavior, if you will, or gender criticals, if you're into that kind of new age branding. But nevertheless, the point being is there is a regressive force which has gotten a hold of positions of power in the Green Party and seek to undo the platform amendments and the progressive policies which we've enacted over the decades. And so we find ourselves, I think, in one of these moments, which is a liminal moment for us as a party, which means we're transitioning from one phase to another, right? And we're kind of like in this doorway, this nebulous space. But what I think we are looking at in a broad sense isn't so much a political discussion, even though people would have you sort of maybe believe it is. It isn't that. I think it's far more personal. I think it's more, and I know not everyone believes in souls and such, but I believe that this is a quest for the soul of the Green Party of the United States. And I believe that if we are going to be a progressive party, which grows in the future, then we have to have progressive views which appeal to the younger demographic. That's where we're going to grow our party. And young people overwhelmingly are in support of queer rights and trans people. So we can't really afford to grow our party or try to grow our party taking regressive positions about social justice issues. So that's all, I think, pretty straightforward and pretty clear. I think from my perspective, as a co-chair here, there's some responsibility on me to do things about stuff that happens. And oh, wow, do I wish I could just kind of snap my fingers and make things happen. Unfortunately, in a democratic system, it doesn't work like that. And we do value our democracy a great deal. So this means, in a practical sense, that getting rid of toxic behaviors, getting rid of people who advance these kind of things is a slow process, and it can be really off-putting if you're an activist sort. And so I would say to you, if you're, a Green and you're seeing this issue coming up in your locals or your state parties, maybe you've not even heard of it yet, and you're just kind of catching a wind of it. Let me tell you, there are a lot of Greens that are working collectively together to oppose this kind of hate-based ideology. And it really is hate-based. These people aren't trying to protect the children. This was like, if you've been around any social justice movements in the United States, at least for the last 60 years, you've seen this over and over again, right? When gay guys were getting into the locker rooms and stuff, they're like, oh no, we can't let gay guys in the locker rooms because of the kids. And then the lesbian women are going there, oh, we can't let them in because of the kids. And now the trans women, oh, we can't let them in because of the kids. It's always this thing because of the kids. But you know what? It never really is about the kids. It's always about those parents. It's always about those people projecting their fears onto somebody else and then interacting with them. That is not a good way to be as a person in general. And it's most assuredly not a way for us to be as a political party. So when we see Greens, specifically in certain groups and organizations, echoing the same kinds of talking points that Republicans in North Carolina, for instance, may have articulated during their infamous bathroom bill. It makes me wonder, like, where are they getting these ideas from? Where does this come? And it brings into sharp relief the fact that there is no letdown of our vigilance. Even in a group as safe as our own, you will still have people who have these kind of views, and they have to be addressed in a very concrete and direct way. And I feel like we're doing that in a significant manner in the Green Party, but we still need to do a lot more here. And I'm grateful for solid allies like Howie and Angela and Emma that help bring our social justice issues to the forefront of our party and to the broader society at large.
And part of what we're doing right now in this culture and also within the Green Party is, in some ways, we're deconstructing gender. And so we have to also make sure that we're including the voices of non-binary people in our conversations. First of all, I want to acknowledge this is Women's History Month, and it's important to acknowledge like all women, cisgender women and transgender women, and also non-binary people who may also sometimes identify in a binary. But it's important to recognize, like, for transgender women, like, we're not trying to erase the identities of women. That's one of the arguments that we get a lot in the Green Party, is this idea that somehow trans women, our existence erases women. And the reason that they say that is because they say that by including trans women, like somehow we're going to erase other women's authentic experience. I want to tell you something. Most trans women I know are feminists. Not all trans women are, but most trans women I know are feminists. And we're so well versed on what it means to be a feminist. I was just interviewing Abby Stein this weekend. She spoke here in Portland as part of a book presentation about her new book called Becoming Eve. And she had an article in Glamour magazine talking about her experiences when she transitioned. She came from this Hasidic community, and she transitioned when she was able to escape from that to become her real authentic self. And now she's one of the most famous trans women in the world. And she wrote an article about the incredible amount of sexism that she experienced as a transgender woman. And we understand what it's like to live under the patriarchy. In some ways, we understand what it's like to live under the patriarchy as not in the same way cisgender women experience it, but in a way that's really unique and in a way that's as equally oppressive as the way that all cisgender women experience patriarchy. And so we're really sisters. We're sisters and we're allies, and we should really be working together. So for those Greens who have problems with trans women within the Green Party, I just want to let you know that I consider you my sisters. And I hope that we can work together because we have so much, sisterhood is universal and we have so much in common. So I hope you will work with us to advance the rights of everyone.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that, Emma. There is a fair misunderstanding, I think, in the Green Party, right? One of the arguments that I do hear a bunch, and you're right, there's like this idea that trans women somehow erase cisgender women, which is a weird kind of notion just on its surface. And if you explore it at any depth, you'll discover how weird it is. But one of the, I think if I could expound on that for a little bit from my perspective, one of the things I see a bunch in this dialogue too is this idea that somehow if we acknowledge that trans women are women and deserving of full equal participation in society, that somehow takes away from the rights which have already been won by cis women, which of course does not add up. Here's kind of how this works. The more people have equal rights, the more equal rights there are. And since we all want more equal rights, this is a good thing. So we give more rights to everybody, therefore everyone has more rights and there's more rights. When you take rights away or to keep people from having the same rights, then there's less rights for everybody, which means since you're part of everybody, there's less rights for you, even though it doesn't perhaps seem like that initially. So we're broadly inclusive, we're part of society. And so there's that. And as you were mentioning, like there's this like sort of kind of dichotomy placed in this argument where there's a, a some unknown element that happens with kids, right? Whereas as if the parents of the kids themselves, and the healthcare providers are all engaged in some sort of undocumented experiment with this kid's life that the kid has no say in, which of course isn't true. It's not even remotely the case. The WPATH standards and pediatric standards for trans children's health are well established and have been now for more than 20 years. Our opponents like to suggest that there's no science to support this stuff, which is completely false. There's tons of it. And the fact that there is tons of it is great because, more knowledge is good. But let me be really, really clear about something. You shouldn't have to be an expert in law and endocrinology and social justice issues or any of the other things to simply exist as a person. You shouldn't be queried about that stuff every time you do anything. Every trans person basically has to be that way, and it's supremely tiring. It's grateful for me when our allies step forward and do more than just, like rah-rah cheer, but actually stand up and confront bigotry when it occurs, especially when trans people and non-binary people are not present in the room. It's easy to, have my back when I'm standing there. It's hard to do that when you're the only one in the room and there's no one else there, right? But that's what real courage and allyship is. That's what we need. We need the kind of allies who stand up for us when we're not there, because there's so few of us. And I'm grateful that most people in the Green Party are those kind of allies. So my question, as I think in my head, is how do I talk to the people in the Green Party who don't feel like we can work together, who don't feel like we're allies? And I confess that I feel like, Emma, you have a broader approach than I do, and perhaps one that will find more common ground with people. I've come to take a bit of a more hardline attitude about these things.
Well, you're doing a great job, Margaret. I'm so glad you're on the steering committee. And I'm so grateful to Howie and Angela for having us on. I mean, I was a big supporter of Howie out here in Oregon and Angela. And it's because, Howie walks what is it? You walk the talk or something like that. I mean, you do the real thing. And it's like, not only do you focus on the voices of like working people, and you focus on the voices of the environment and the radical struggle. But you learn. I mean, you learn from your conversations with the community, and that's why I feel like you and Angela were such a great follow-up to Jill and Sherry. And I'm really, really tickled to be on the show tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. And I actually wanted to Margaret's question, Howie, where were you? How were you? What did you have on that?
What was the question?
Margaret, do you mind repeating it? Because it was good. And my memory's short.
My memory is short too. I don't remember what I asked.
It was about the Green Party and how to speak to people in the Green Party.
Oh, yes. All right. I suppose I was just kind of more suggesting that Emma's approach might be better, i.e. more, here's the peace branch. Let's find peace and common ground. In my experience so far, every time I keep offering the peace branch, my opponents take it from me and hit me with it. So at this point, I'm tired of sticking that out there to them.
It's hard to do. I mean, but I'm definitely someone who practices nonviolence. So, I mean, I'm a principal believer in the philosophy of nonviolence. I believe that the best way to move forward, if you possibly can, is by winning over the hearts of the people that you think are your enemy. Because number one, they're really not your enemy. They're just someone who, they're just people who aren't your friends yet. And number two, I think that nonviolence, and I'm not saying that other strategies aren't just as equally valid, but for me personally, nonviolence is always like the philosophy that I'm going to choose to adopt when working with issues of struggle. I feel like it's worked very effectively in the past. It's a great way to organize. It's an important tool. And for me, it's really the only way that I can be. So.
Well, what I tell people, it's a short conversation. I say trans rights are human rights, and they're not in conflict with women's rights. And then if they start to, push back on that, I say get real. There were more murders of trans women last year than any year since the Human Rights Committee, started keeping track. And you want to talk about women in sports, like these extremist Republicans in states where sometimes the legislators can't tell you where there was any issue with a trans woman competing in a sport. And then, pretty much the conversation ends. So it's pretty simple. Trans rights are human rights. They're not in conflict with women's rights. Next question. Next question is, how do we get this codified? The House has passed the Equality Act. It's now in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And what that would do is give everywhere in the federal code where there are protected groups, like ethnic minorities and women, it would now include LGBTQ people and gender or gender identity, so that all the protections would include those people who suffer discrimination, pretty much every week. And, I would say if the Democrats can't get these civil rights passed, they're useless, really. I mean, what's holding it up is the filibuster. And if they're going to let that filibuster stand in the way of these rights for LGBTQ people and people based on gender identity, as well as these voter suppression laws aimed at people of color, DC statehood, there are all these laws that are basic democracy and civil rights. And if they let the Republicans veto these things, or with the filibuster, they are letting the Republicans, through voter suppression and partisan gerrymandering, rule as a minority in this country and take back Congress. And you'll have the Grim Reaper, Mitch McConnell, preventing anything positive from happening. All he'll do is make sure there are more extremist judges on the courts who will take away our rights, not just the rights of minorities, but labor rights. There's a case before the court right now. If they rule the way the employers want, OSHA won't be able to go in, FDA won't be able to go in, EPA won't be able to go in to company properties to see if they're actually following the law and not poisoning us. So,
Howie, one of the issues,
don't get the Equality Act passed. That's a litmus test. And anybody who thinks the Democrats are worth anything should reconsider their position.
So, Howie, one of the issues that you just brought up, the Equality Act, is just so important, and I want to bring that up in connection with another issue that the Democrats failed to enact, which was the $15 an hour minimum wage. So trans women and transgender people generally are some of the lowest paid workers in this country, and they're also like people who are in one of the highest categories of unemployment. And this is a double burden, because not only do trans folks have the difficulty of finding employment, but when they do find employment, usually it's at some of the lowest levels in our country. And so if we had passed a living wage, which honestly is higher than $15 an hour, but at least that would be a good start. If we had passed a $15 an hour minimum wage, it would have had the most radical effect on the health and well-being of transgender people around this country. Hundreds of thousands of transgender people would have benefited who work at low-income jobs, who work for minimum wage and sub-minimum wage. And so trans women, along with many other disenfranchised groups within our country, really need that kind of legislation. We also need the Equality Act to protect our rights in the workplace, because transgender people are constantly under scrutiny, we're constantly under surveillance, and we're always losing our jobs because there are so many states that are right to work states where people don't have a right. You can just get fired for any reason. And if you're transgender, that's a very easy reason to fire someone. you can find some other excuse because you don't like their gender expression. So we need to pass the Equality Act. We need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And everything that the Green New Deal and that the Green Party stands for is going to lift up the rights of transgender people, along with all of the other disenfranchised groups in our country. So let's do it.
And one of the things that I was thinking about is, those policies that would have helped. And, raising the wage, something as absolutely necessary as Medicare for all. Right now, in the middle of a pandemic, making sure everyone is covered, implementing when at a time when so many people are out of work. And when we're talking about sex work, which is something that's very close to my heart personally, that is definitely an issue for the LGBTQIA plus community. A lot of our members of our community are sex workers. So, and like I said, we're going to have a live stream on that. But you're talking about people who are at the very margins that would be helped by a guaranteed basic income above poverty. Something that you can count on every month that gives you options, as far as keeping you from slipping between the cracks. So, all of these policies that, Howie and I championed and continue to champion because it's just common sense. These are good for our community. These are good for our family along the LGBTQIA plus rainbow. So, yeah, that was an excellent point, Emma.
Thank you. Margaret, what do you think about all this?
Okay, so here I have 3 thoughts in no particular order. Number 1, so my very first position in the Green Party was as the national delegate for the Lavender Caucus, and I was approached for that position specifically to argue for sex workers' amendment to our platform because I believe so strongly in sex worker protections. I myself, like many people in our community, have been a sex worker in the past, and it has been a vital source of income to me at various points in my life. So having protections for actual work is a good thing, and we should definitely do that. Number 2, how this all kind of relates to me, aside from my own personal experience, is that like when I think about what the Green Party is, we are one of 4 electoral parties in the United States. We are the only left party, the only left one. I don't mean like the only one that is remaining, which would be great, kind of, but the only party on the left, which means we have an obligation in a real way to represent a solid left perspective. And the solid left perspective is including and inclusive of sex workers and sex worker rights. We just can't afford to dodge on that issue any longer. And that, of course, is intimately connected with our community. And the third thing I want to say is like, there is this broad, I think, awareness that I witness rising, not just in the Green Party, but certainly here, but also in broader society of not just, oh, trans people exist, but specifically how and why we are here, the sorts of realnesses of our life experiences and all the rest. And I think that comes from having good representation that we're starting to see in mainstream media and other kind of sources. And so I'm personally grateful when I get to read the accounts of other trans people who have come before me, because it helps me feel not alone when I see other people around our country, around the world, stepping into positions of leadership or in other positions of responsibility in their community. It gives me hope that there are people who, despite the haters and despite the people who talk negatively to us, the others will permit us to be fully included participants in society. And we get to participate just like everyone else, which is all really that we can ask for. And I'm grateful when I see it happen. Like here in the Green Party, there's a lot of like tension right now about this issue, but you see plenty of people around us who are completely supportive and willing to learn and become educated allies so that they can educate others. They don't just put it all onto the trans people and the queer folks in the party to do the heavy lifting. And frankly, as a person who's been around the block a few times, I am grateful for that, because you can only carry so much for so long. And it's just been a fantastic experience broadly to meet Howie and Angela and the other Greens in the party. And I just want to say, as a personal side, because I haven't got a chance to say this since the elections, I was really, really happy to have Angela on and Darlene, the competitor, to the National Lavender Caucus, so we could interview them, because oh my gosh, it was so great to have them there and get a chance to speak and everything. And it was really fantastic. And I've been really impressed by everything I've seen coming out of the Hawkins Walker campaign over the entire course of the election cycle. And I'm really eager to see what continues to come up, and especially that conversation you'll be having coming up later on with sex workers. I'm going to tune in for that.
That's what's up. And, I'll pitch it at the end, but, if there are people who are, in our Green family who are watching, folks who know folks that want to be part of that discussion, I'm gonna let y'all know. Y'all need to holler at me. One of our dope folks, our family members, Jennifer Hyman, hey boo, hey Gabriella, is asking, how do we best respond to trans people who don't fit the narrative of passability of male to female or female to male post-op transition?
So, okay, there's a couple of things. First of all, being transgender is not the same thing as passing or even fitting into the binary. So it's important to understand that. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, some of the most visionary and radical people are people right now who are bigender or agender. So you don't have to pass and fit into the binary. As a matter of fact, that's part of what's missing in the conversation right now, is the whole non-binary perspective, because that's really where it's at right now. In a way, trans is kind of like almost like it's like the last next thing, and the next thing right now is non-binary, because non-binary is like people saying, I'm not going to identify with either gender. I'm not going to, because you have to understand that in some ways, gender is a social construction. I mean, gender is also an authentic expression that people want to be. Like, I want to be female. I am female. But there's also a lot of people who don't want to be a gender. They don't like, there's lots of people who are assigned female at birth who don't want the expectations and burdens that are placed on women in this culture, where they're expected to be a certain kind of way because of a gender that they've been assigned to. So trans people don't necessarily have to pass, and they don't have to belong to a trans female or trans male perspective, but a lot of us do want to. I mean, that's important to us. It's important to many of us, but not all of us. So that's one answer. What about you, Margaret? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I am a non-binary person. And so I guess my answer would be slightly different in that I don't know that there's a specific thing to do, like to support your trans friend, right? If so, to kind of add on to what Emma's saying, not every trans person, even like leaving aside non-binary folks, but not every trans person has a goal to pass. That's not a thing for some of them. And so, like, I think realistically, the way you help trans people is by asking them what kind of help they need, and then doing that, rather than kind of guessing maybe at the kind of help that you think they need and doing that. So actual help is good. Yeah, outside of that, it's not as good. But yeah, so like as a non-binary person, I feel like, I don't know, it's a little tricky, because clearly society has, as you mentioned earlier, right? Like if you transgress the patriarchy, there are societal consequences for that. And non-binary folks, regardless of how they were assigned at birth, do that. And depending on how much they do, the patriarchy, or members who support it, I should say, will lash out at them and be violent towards them because of it. So there is some practical value. I mean, what can I say? There's a practical, I feel safer kind of concern when you do pass in society, as you were mentioning earlier. You could just walk out, in society, and no one's going to say anything to you, and you can use the public facilities and everything is fine. And as somebody who doesn't pass, like myself, when I go out, I don't feel the same way. I feel like I have to be more mindful about that kind of thing. And I don't know if it produces like an overall sense of paranoia in every person, but definitely if you live in a place where there are not a lot of trans people, you might very well be the only one in your entire municipality. And so you will feel quite out of place. I think it's tricky in that sense. And, for anyone so in the real practical street level reality of it is this: if you feel unsafe because you don't pass, then that is a pretty awful situation, because it's definitely true and real. And there is a social value in passing. That's the fact. Our community does a weird thing with that. And we really, as you were mentioning earlier, we really need to have an internal discourse about that kind of thing. Nevertheless, it's very, very clear that people still interact with us. It doesn't matter if you say, oh, I'm a non-binary person or whatever. People interact with you based on what they think you are, based on your phenotype. And this is one of the interesting parts of this discussion where I think it gets lost a bunch, right? Our opponents often make an argument which is something along the lines of, well, cis women are a different genotype. Now, they don't say that word, but that's what they mean. And our argument is they are the same phenotype. And I think that mostly what happens here is a misunderstanding of phenotype and genotypes in terms of how things work. So phenotype is a scientific word for saying how things look, how they appear to us, which is how discrimination works. When we see a person, when we see somebody else, we form opinions based on what they look like, what our senses inform us, whatever our cultural perceptions might have been inculcated into us, and we decide, usually man, woman, perhaps non-binary. But those associations of man, woman, non-binary all carry a whole host of other characteristics. So if we assign somebody based on looks, oh, this is a woman, then it has all these other things attached to it, none of which we know if are true. We just attach them to this idea, which is why we know discriminations are based on stereotypes, because stereotypes are these common qualities just attributed, broadly speaking, to an individual, even if that individual may not possess those qualities. So when people are discriminating against others, that's exactly it. It's this phenotype sort of thing. And in our conversations broadly, it's that. I think, which comes up a lot. And I wish I could somehow just help people see that this discrimination arises from their perceptions of others and the culture which they've been raised in, but it seems very difficult to break through in that kind of way. And so, I'm looking for new ideas to get out of that rut. And, workshops and political classes that you have in political parties are great. Things like this are fantastic, where we have an opportunity to speak broadly to the public. But still, I feel, and Emma, maybe you could talk to this a little bit, but I feel like there's this broad sense in society that the situation is becoming more tense, that there's more conflict between the two groups rather than less.
I think it's really similar to the gay rights movement. I mean, I think that what's going on is that transgender people are becoming more visible. And as we become more visible, there's also this pushback. And the pushback is kind of what we're feeling right now. It's this pushback. That's why I'm glad I'm in the Green Party. I know that we're having some issues at the national level in the Green Party, but it's only coming from a very small group of people. And I know that most Greens support trans rights. It's like Howie said a minute ago, trans rights are human rights. I mean, I think that most people just broadly accept that. But at the same time, like both within the party, but also within the broader public, there's a pushback. And the pushback is what we're feeling. And that means that we're actually gaining power. But we're also in danger of losing power. So it's a dangerous place to be. I mean, we're kind of on the front edge. along with people of color and lots of other folks. We're on the front edge of patriarchy, and for people of color, they're on the front edge of white supremacy, and white supremacy is losing, and patriarchy is losing too. So that's a good thing.
And both of those serve are the children of capitalism. So, that's our, we topple the granddaddy, the grandkids follow. So one thing and Riley, I love what you said in the chat. Hey, sweetheart. Gender non-conforming binary trans people are also valid. Absolutely. And Eric Gray, I'm looking for your comment because I love this. And this is something that comes up all the time, especially when we are talking about cisgender heterosexual men. How can we, hey, Eric darling, how can we as men be of help to trans people across the board? I love you for that.
Do you want to go first, Margaret?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. As a matter of fact, I'll jump right in. Excuse me while I go. So yeah, how can you be of help? This is a great question. Basically, how you would help literally any other marginalized group. So if you see somebody, like if you're the only person in the room and there's no trans people present and you hear a trans person being talked about and misgendered, correct the people. Don't let them get away with that stuff. Confront them about it and maybe explain, oh yeah, by the way, did you know that this, you might have, thought it was this way, but this is the way it currently is. I mean, obviously use your own idiom here to do this, but my point is you can confront transphobia when it rises, when other people aren't there, when you're like the only person. If you're in a group with people and there is a trans person, it's important to center them in the conversation, but it's not the case that you have to abdicate all speaking to the trans person. They want help from allies too. It's a broad perspective. So like if you're in a debate or a group with somebody and there's a confrontation, you can speak up and support the trans people who are perhaps, let's say, carrying the heavy load on that. But this is broadly speaking the way you would work with any other minority group that you're trying to support. You center them in the discussion. You ask them specifically, how can I help? And then listen to what they say and then do that. A lot of people will say something like, how can I help? Then you tell them and then they do something else, which is not helping.
Some other things that you can do, or if you'd like to learn more about where the struggles for trans rights are really on an edge right now, your state might be one of the states that has bills that are anti-trans. There's, I think, what did you say, Margaret? There's 19 states right now with legislation designed to like kind of push back against the progress that we've made. A lot of them have to do with trans kids. So if you've got kids, talk to your kids about it too, because your kids might be getting really bad messages. They might be getting messages that are transphobic, and for a lot of us who are transgender, we've known since we were very young that we were transgender. I mean, I knew when I was like 5 years old that I was a woman, and that's not uncommon. It's very common. And so, a lot of kids who are like in high school, they already know that they're transgender. And if you know your kids are going to school with trans kids, maybe have a talk with them and like let them know that trans kids are normal. We're just a normal part of society and we're just trying to live our lives, that's if you can just teach the basics: compassion, equity, inclusion, kindness, respect, for everyone, including trans people. That's really what we need.
I was looking for another question because I thought I saw one, which was dope. But no, I think those are really excellent suggestions. And also, it comes from the top. And thinking about, like Eric Gray is saying in the chat, I'm sure Florida has anti-trans legislation. I think there are if I recall correctly, 84 anti-trans bills pending around the country. South Carolina is definitely one. And I got some choice words with some folks. But yeah, so
and these are part of a package. These are like part of a package of hatred. So most places where you find these anti-trans bills, you also find things like bills to try to limit voter rights. And you also find places where they're doing, they're trying to create laws against workplace rights, against workers' rights, and against, rights of, people of immigrants. I mean, they all come together as a package. Like all of these things are on the front edge of hatred. So if you're going to find anti-trans legislation, it's going to be coupled with anti-immigrant legislation, with anti-worker legislation. It's all going to be part of one big package of hate.
And also, like here in South Carolina, which y'all mentioned earlier, the attacks on pregnant people's right to bodily autonomy, that is happening here in South Carolina as well. So, you're absolutely right, Emma. These things are all balled together. And the minute, these folks understand ultimately they're going to lose, but they're causing harm in the process. And so, people, we need to speak out on that, and we need to be aware that it is happening. And I'm sure if it's happening in South Carolina, I know it's happening in Florida. And our boss is saying, educate yourself. Yeah, for our cisgender men, educate yourself on what, listening to the voices of trans people, because we're not trans. We don't know what that experience is like. So we need to listen to people who do. Hey, Riley Boo. There's lots of trans people and trans people with even one supportive. Did you mean without, baby? Or let me just read how you wrote it. There's lots of closeted trans people, and trans people with even one supportive person in their life have suicide rates drop. So being a consistent ally could let someone come out to you and be that support. That is absolutely, I think, crucial, especially since some of these bills are, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong on this, some of these bills are aimed at forcing trans and non-binary youth, basically, if they speak to a trusted adult at their school, to out them to their parents, which could be fatal. I mean, let's just be honest. All parents don't need to be having. There's a whole lot of folks, transphobic parents. So what do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the statistics are that 41% of all trans folks have tried to commit suicide at some point in their life. The rates of suicide or attempted suicide and completed suicide are really high for trans folks. So what Riley was saying is really true. And what you were saying was also really true, Angela.
Margaret, what are your thoughts?
I have a lot of complicated thoughts about this because I've lost, more than a handful of friends to suicide. And I want to kind of close the circle on something that Emma was saying earlier. So in this idea that trans people are in some manner having some kind of mental issue or mental health crisis, right? Then when you see some sort of statistic like, 41% of trans people attempt suicide, that's not successful, of course, but attempt. Nevertheless, you can then say to yourself, oh, well, perhaps there is some correlation here, some connection. But that is not the case. If you ask trans people who have attempted suicide and survived why they did it, overwhelmingly the case is harassment and discrimination coming from cis people towards them. It's that we're not, generally speaking, dealing with these kind of things unless the bigotry and harassment is so significantly coming from the cis people around us that we cannot deal, and there's no escape from it because it's society. It's everywhere. There's no getting away from it. And so, that's the reality of it. When we want to talk for reals about, like, trans and non-binary folks, suicide attempts and stuff like that, there's really no kind of discussion that we can have in a meaningful sense unless we discuss why it's occurring, which is the bullying and harassment, which comes overwhelmingly from cis people. So how do we stop that? Well, that's a great question, because bullying and harassment exists towards every minority person in every way. And even if you're perceived in some manner, even if you're part of the majority, but if you're perceived to be deviant in some fashion, then you can be subjected to the same level of ostracization and bullying that the in-group reserves for out-group people. And so people like really seek to avoid that, right? But basically that's just it. There's a big problem with it because of the overwhelming bullying and that happens. So what do we do about this stuff? I'm not really sure, to be fair. I wish I had the good answer for that, but I know one of the answers to it is to empower our young people in such a way that they don't have to put themselves into situations which are specifically harmful. And as Emma was mentioning, there are some laws that are going to require trans youth to be outed to their parents. In some situations, that's going to be very, very detrimental to their well-being. And I think that as people, beings of moral conscience, and as people who are Greens, we have an obligation and a duty to oppose these things, not just because, it's like a progressive political policy per se, but because this is, human rights. This is anathema to what good conscienced beings are about. You should not be doing these things, and we should never be doing this stuff as Greens. And the fact that it happens in our party, and you see some folks condoning this stuff, is just more evidence that we have work to do to build a strong progressive party here on the left.
Hey, Christina. Hey, baby. Yes, I am a closeted trans woman because I am only 17 years old and my mom is transphobic.
Mm.
So
Hey,
just
Christine.
thinking about, what y'all were saying. And there was also another comment in the chat. I think it was Daniel's comment that I love. Daniel Travis Bumbarger. Now, if I mispronounce your last name, go on and let me know, boo. But
Hey, Christine, can I ask a
go ahead.
question of you? Yeah, Christine, is there a gay straight is there a GS? Are you in high school, Christine? And if you are, is there a GSA in your high school? I just wanted to ask that because the gay straight alliances are like a really great place for trans kids to go, especially high school students. Gay straight alliances, GSAs, are in a lot of high schools around the country. And there are places where straight kids and queer kids get together and have allyship and support. I don't know if that's in your high school. I'm really sorry that your mom is transphobic. That's really terrible. If you need any support outside of the GSA, please feel free to write to me, or I don't know if Margaret, if you're open to having communication, but I'm more than willing to help you like find sources of allyship and support so that you don't feel so alone. But you have a beautiful future ahead of you, believe me. This is like the best time in the whole world to ever have been born transgender. So your future is really bright. So if you can get past the next couple of years and get to a safe place where you can really be loved and accepted for who you are, you won't believe what kind of a future is waiting for you, because it's really amazing. It's so beautiful to be transgender, and maybe your mom will come around.
Thank you for that, Emma. Oh, and Christina says thank you. No, that was beautiful and that was perfect. So Emma's information is in the chat, Christina. So our boss just popped it up again. So please, please, please reach out. And Emma, I thank you for making that offer and taking care of our folks. And Daniel Travis Bumbarger is saying, access to gender-affirming healthcare is absolutely life-saving care. These bills targeting trans kids are frankly pro-child death. Yet these are often folks who call themselves pro-life pushing them.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, one of the things that really still needs to happen in a lot of states is really creating, gender affirming care for folks who want to transition. Here in Oregon, we've got a pretty good path set up, and we have several gender pathways. It's important that your local hospitals and your local healthcare institutions like have have the resources and the tools in place to provide for gender affirming care. Gender affirming care includes, first of all, it includes making sure that healthcare professionals understand the correct pronouns to use. And then it also makes sure to understand that there's a therapists, healthcare providers who are there who can help with letters and with therapy, especially for kids, but also for adults. And then there's also appropriate treatments, including access to hormones, access to surgeries, good postoperative care for transgender folks, and that there's support networks in place. So these are all important parts of gender affirming care. And it's sort of a new field within the medical profession. I mean, there's been transition for a long time, but it was considered just cosmetic. And it's only recently that like healthcare institutions have really begun to embrace gender affirming care like as part of clinical medical practice. And it's still not something that's everywhere. Here on the West Coast, we're doing really good. Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, but in a lot of the heartland, a lot of rural America, it's still really hard to get access to good gender affirming care for trans folks. So that's something we really need to still work on.
All right. And because I'm not trying to, although I could very easily, trying to keep y'all here all night, because y'all know I get up with the chickens.
Me too. I'll be up tomorrow at 4 a.m.
Child. So give us your last things that you'd like to say to the folks. And we're gonna start with you, Margaret.
Okay, so oh my gosh, the pressure. All right. So the last things I want to say to you, I guess I have two things I want to say depending on if you're a Green or if you're not a Green. First off, if you're not a Green, join the Green Party. Secondly, but more relevant to what we're talking about here, if you are a non-green and you're watching this and you really want to help your trans and non-binary friends, then listen to what we have said and just ask them how to help. That's probably the best way. So let me speak to the rest of you then who are Greens and might find yourself in a varying array of positions on what's going on here. So first off, I want to say to you that I appreciate your help. The caucus, the National Lavender Green Caucus, appreciates all the allyship that we've seen throughout the entire Green Party. We've got 17 locals and caucuses and states who have supported our efforts so far and have spoken strongly and firmly against transphobia, which is present in the Green Party, and have committed to making sure that we get rid of it. And we create a safe space for every trans and non-binary person to participate in our party. And as a bit of an aspirational sort of thing at the end here, I want to say something, and I don't mean to sound flip, but and I'm going to paraphrase this slightly, so pardon me, but the moral arc of the universe spins ever upward, and we are going to win because we are right and our opponents are dumb.
I'm here for it. Emma?
Sure. Yeah, I want to say transgender people are beautiful. It's such a joy being a trans woman. I mean, I cannot tell you how happy I am, how just deeply satisfied and grateful I am that I was born in a time when I can be a trans woman and really fully embrace my identity. I want to thank you, Angela, and I want to thank you, Howie, for having us on. I also want to have a shout out to Rose Roby, because I know Rose is working behind the scenes and she does so much. And also to everyone else who's working behind the scenes. Andrea, thank you so much for what you're doing. And thanks so much for having us on. It's just a real pleasure.
I am So great. Well, Howie, go ahead, because you know I talk too much. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Margaret Elizabeth and Emma, for coming on. I think a lot of people got educated. And as I've been thinking about this, I keep going back to the fact that we got to realize there's still a lot of violence against transgender women. I mentioned the murder rate. There are elected officials in Brazil where they have the highest rates of transgender murders who are threatened. They've been elected to city council, to the national legislature, state legislatures, and they're in office and they're being threatened. So this is, a problem. Poland was mentioned. We have this right-wing movement going on around the country. And then we got people at the grassroots. I want to lift up a woman, a transgender woman here in Syracuse, a dozen years ago, young woman named Leticia Greene, 22 years old. Her family was very supportive. She got gunned down in the street, killed in front of a lot of people. And the man that did it was led off by a jury trial, and he was defending himself. Now, he did spend some time in prison because the gun he was using, he didn't have, it was an illegal gun. But that is the mentality out there. And why it's so important, I come back to this Equality Act. I'm not very optimistic that Biden's going to do much about climate or real economic justice or ending these endless wars and U.S. imperialism. But there are basic democratic rights on the table. And I hope people aren't going to sleep. I'm reading how, since Trump isn't on Twitter, not so many people are reading or watching the news and finding out what's going on. And, if the Democrats don't get behind these basic democratic civil rights, voting rights bills, including the Equality Act, because of the filibuster, which has been used by the right in this country to block civil rights going back to the 1800s. And now we got a Republican Party that it doesn't have an economic program. It doesn't have a foreign policy. All it's got is this fascistic, anti-democratic racism and nativism and conspiracism and anti-scientific irrationalism. And if the Democrats accept and allow these people who represent a minority in the country to get power through voter suppression and partisan gerrymandering and taking advantage of the biases built into the U.S. Senate and the Electoral College, we're in deep trouble. So what I'm saying is, don't go to sleep, because right now, in the next weeks and months, is when these basic democratic rights are going to be decided. Is the federal government going to preempt the anti-trans legislation at the state level? Are they going to preempt the voter suppression that's going on at the state level right now against people of color and young people? And if they don't, the Democrats are handing power over to the Republicans, who are now a right-wing extremist party, like that Law and Justice Party in Poland, or Bolsonaro and what he represents in Brazil. This is all over the world. So I'm just saying, don't go to sleep. Stay on your representatives, particularly in the next few months, because basic civil rights, voting rights, democratic rights are on the table. And it's going to make a big difference whether we get them or not. And this is a chance, because 2 years from now, if the Democrats don't get them now, they could be out of luck because of partisan gerrymandering. They lose the House. And the Republicans are running things, even though they got a minority support in the country. So, stay active and fight for what we need.
And all that I have to add to that is what Howie and I usually say to y'all at the end of every live stream. We love you. We are grateful for your presence. We want you to take care of yourselves and do everything that you can to stay healthy, both mentally and physically, because we are living in one heck of a hard timeline. So it's rough out here, and it's real out here. So in the middle of all of these things that, we're having to stand up for and constantly having to fight is exhausting. I will tell you that. If you are someone, it's exhausting. And they know that, which I would argue is part of It's intentional to wear us down. So take care of yourselves. Take them naps. Drink that water. I know y'all heard me. Drink your turmeric. And also with regard to trans rights and thanking, our guests for being here with us, and I'm just going to say it, I'm a scorched earth bitch. When it comes to trans rights and dealing with human rights, I'm not here to debate people's right to exist. It's not a debate. If you are not someone who believes in human rights and the basic right of people to simply exist, we have nothing to discuss. And I want to be very clear about that. There are things that I am willing to have a discussion about. Human rights are not one of those things. And it is not a debate as to the humanity of trans people and gender nonconforming people and non-binary people. That is not up for debate. So let's be very clear about that. So I needed to get that off my chest because somebody gonna look at this and they're gonna misunderstand. Let's be real clear. You can kick rocks. Drop off the face of the planet. I'm good with that. So yes, thank y'all for being here. We love y'all. See you next week.
Thanks, y'all.